Vox website, vox.com, reporting a headline here: corporations now spend more lobbying Congress than taxpayers spend funding Congress. You just have to let that headline sink in for just a minute to really understand what is being said there. Corporations now spend more money lobbying Congress than the entire U.S. taxpayer base spends in funding Congress. Now, why this is so crucial should not be missed. We need to focus on this headline a little bit. I'm going to dive into the article here for a moment. I've got a few other headlines I wanted to get to, but let me focus on this one first, and we'll put a link to it, by the way, in the show notes today. Here's a quote. Corporations now spend about $2.6 billion per year on reported lobbying expenditures, more than the $2 billion that we spend to fund the House, which is about $1.16 billion, and the Senate, which is currently about $820 million. So we got about $2 billion that we put into the House and the Senate every year as taxpayers. But right behind us, the corporations are spending more than that. They're spending $2.6 billion per year. These numbers come from political scientist Lee Drutman, who has authored the book, The Business of America is Lobbying. And to some people, they may not realize why that's such a problem. Well, just think about it this way. If you are, as a taxpayer, giving a total of $2 billion to the Congress, and then you have corporations who are using their lobbying power and are spending $2.6 billion on lobbying, who do you think the congressman or the senator is going to listen to more? We've been saying now for some time that corporations practically rule the world. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Corporations are dominating Washington politics. They're going to dominate this 2016 presidential cycle because of the super PACs, right? You know, we remember back in 2010, 2011, whenever the Federal Election Commission versus Citizens United at the Supreme Court decided in a very bizarre ruling. The whole thing was a circus. Chief Justice Roberts sending back the case back to the attorneys, telling them to argue it on a more broad level, because they had actually brought that case to the Supreme Court. Citizens United had funded a pretty big hit piece on Hillary Clinton. It was a documentary, and it was just, it was just political slime, documentary, masquerading as a documentary. And it was just, slamming Hillary Clinton. And in essence, the Federal Election Commission said, we need to know who's financing this. And Citizens United said, no, we're not going to reveal our donors. Well, the thing went to the Supreme Court. And when it did, the Chief Justice, John Roberts, instead of having the case argued on the merits of the case, on whether this was good or not, he actually pushed back to the attorneys, telling them to argue this more broadly in the fact that, can corporations donate? Can corporations be involved in the political campaign process by donations? And is money free speech? This whole idea. And of course, the Supreme Court ruled in the end in their favor of Citizens United, basically saying that corporations are people. Corporations can donate money. Corporations can do so anonymously through super PACs, which are these gigantic political action committees that hold tremendous sway over our electoral process. Well, I'm just going to read you some of this article here from Vox. Very interesting. Lobbying to most people looks like bribery, the article says. And there's certainly an element of bribery. The lobbyist who refuses to contribute to the re-election campaign isn't going to get a meeting, much less an ally. But after the bribery comes the lobbyist's real job, persuasion. No member of Congress wants to feel bought. What they want to feel is convinced. That's a pretty good distinguishing mark there. They don't want to feel bought. I agree with that. That's certainly true. They want to feel convinced. That makes a lot of sense. It's the lobbyist's job to give them that feeling, to make them feel like they're casting the right vote, not just the vote they were paid to cast. Lobbying thrives on ignorance and apathy. No member of Congress can be expert on all the issues that cross his or her desk. But members of Congress can be expert, or at least they think they're expert on some issues. And these are the issues where lobbying is hardest. and least effective. Lobbyists cannot make Republicans vote for Obamacare or Democrats vote for Paul Ryan's budget. Their sorcery rarely works on issues ruled by ideology, but their spells are powerful when cast upon obscure subparagraphs, technical amendments, and legislation that will never make headlines. It's in that vast gap between how many issues the members of Congress and their staffs can know and care about and how many issues they're being asked to vote on where lobbying is most powerful. And there is so much money in that gap. Now, the article goes on and it explains how this works. And I got to tell you, this is pretty eye-opening, and I want to read this because it'll help you understand why our electoral process is so jacked up. The way it will work is that an obscure tax break that neither the congressman nor his staff has ever heard of will be set to expire. Neither the congressman nor his staff will have any particular opinion as to whether the tax break should be renewed. But the congressman will get a request for a meeting from a lobbyist who has been a big supporter of his campaigns. It'll only take 20 minutes, the lobbyist promises. No big deal. And you know what? The lobbyist will make a good case for keeping that tax break. The lobbyist, after all, was hired because he or she is good at making cases. She will walk in prepared, knowledgeable, charismatic. She'll know how the tax provision will affect businesses in that member's district. Maybe she'll even have brought some business owners from the congressman's district along. She might even know the congressman already or have worked for him in the past. Corporate America is buying a lot of talent like that with the over $2 billion that they have to spend per year. But even if the lobbyist makes a bad case, the congressman may never realize it. Congress has a very limited amount of money with which to inform itself. Corporate America, on the other hand, has vastly more money with which to inform Congress. It's easy to make an argument sound good when no one is arguing the other side. That's what those numbers show. The forces of corporate lobbying have much more money to inform the Congress than Congress has money to inform itself. So in essence, the Congress is outsourcing its thinking to lobbyists on many different issues. Now, this article is very good in the fact that it doesn't skew the issue. I mean, there's no doubt about it that ideology really rules the day in Washington. You're not going to get a Republican, for example, to vote for something that he is completely opposed to or that's going to make him look bad in the re-election. It's very, very rare. But there are so many different topics and so many different things that are impacting every single different district across the country and every single different precinct, whether you're in the national level or whether you're a local politician. And lobbyists are right there to, quote unquote, inform you about what's going on. And these lobbyists are not paid by individuals like you and me, right? We're out here working for a living. We're out here trying to take care of our families. That's not who's funding these lobby groups. It's the corporations. And the corporations have oftentimes very different incentives than what you have as an individual. And so you're being outspent. You're being outspent by corporations out there who are plowing massive amounts of money in now because the Supreme Court has said basically there's no limit and you can give anonymously. No one has to know who you are. And this became a really big issue back with the Scott Walker recall. Remember back in Wisconsin whenever Scott Walker took on the unions and the teacher, remember that it was a terrible crisis. I mean, there was teachers and the labor unions were out in full force at the state capitol. And Scott Walker, who was the governor, was under massive fire from all of those groups. And the Koch brothers, who are on the right, stepped in and really began to up the ante, allowing him to win the recall that they had placed upon Scott Walker. Basically, the corporations, through their super PACs, were able to outspend the labor unions and the Democratic side's super PACs. So at some point you realize that these people are not fighting for the average American person. They're fighting for the personhood of corporations. And you have to decide whether you agree with that or not. You have to decide. And you're going to hear probably a lot about this in the 2016 campaign, that money is free speech, right? This concept that money itself, when you give money to a political action committee, that is free speech. You may not open your mouth, but you just open your wallet. Well, in such a society, the people with the most money have the most free speech, and that's a concern. That is a concern that I think all of us need to be aware of and need to have, formulated an opinion on, because that's no doubt going to be coming up as we near this 2016 election. Now, let me go back here and talk to you about the rest of this article. This is probably the most insidious thing about Washington, is that whenever these guys go to Washington, they get elected, they go to Capitol Hill, well, they're enticed by these lobbying groups and various corporations to continue to support their particular aims with the hopes that whenever they do finally get ousted from Congress or they decide to step down, that they'll have a nice, cushy job in the lobbying sector or at some corporation where they'll make much more money. The Center for Responsive Politics found that more than half of members of Congress who left the body after 2010 are now lobbying or have lobbying-related jobs. Can you believe that? Half of the members of Congress, when they leave, they get elected, they go to serve the American people, quote unquote, and then half of them end up lobbying in Wall Street. They just simply move from the Capitol Hill down to K Street, which is the kind of the big area that's known for all of the lobbying groups and all the Washington NGOs and all of this. Here's what the article says. The fact that corporations spend more lobbying Congress than Congress spends on itself is a disaster. It means there is a massive pay gap between the people serving in Congress and the people lobbying Congress. And everyone working in Congress knows it. What's worse, they know how to fix it. As one frustrated congressman wrote, quote, Congress is no longer a destination, but a journey. Committee assignments are mainly valuable as part of the interview process for a more lucrative job on K Street. As a lobbyist, you are considered naive if you're not currying favor with wealthy corporations under your jurisdiction. It's become routine to see members of Congress drop their seat in Congress like a hot rock when a particularly lush vacancy opens up. Unquote. Unreal. That's just really unreal. That's very revealing. That pay gap opens space for corruption to ooze through the system. Lobbyists try to get members of Congress and their staffs thinking about a high-paying lobbying job as early as they possibly can, sometimes years before they actually leave the Capitol. What they want is for the members of Congress and their staffs to treat every day on the Hill as a job interview for the lobbying gig that they want when they leave the Hill. As disgraced lobbyist Jack Abramoff wrote in his memoir, quote, I would say a few magic words. When you're done working with a congressman, you should come and see me at my firm. When you're done working for the congressman, you should come work for me at my firm. With that, assuming the staffer had any interest in leaving Capitol Hill for K Street, and almost 90% of them do, I would own him, and consequently that entire office. No rules had been broken. No one even knew what was happening. But suddenly, every move that staffer made, he made with his future at my firm in mind. His paycheck may have been signed by the Congress, but he was already working for me, influencing his office for my client's best interests. It was a perfect and perfectly corrupt arrangement, unquote. The article goes on and says, remember, lobbying is about persuasion, and no one is more persuasive than your friend or your former colleague. Lobbying firms know that sending fresh-faced kids 6 months out of Princeton to lecture a member of Congress about agricultural subsidies probably is not going to end well. What they want to do is send the staffer that member of Congress spent 6 years working with, a person that member of Congress actually respects, actually listens to, actually likes, to talk to him about agricultural subsidies. That's why it's so valuable for lobbying firms to hire former members of Congress and ex-congressional staffers. It's not just that those relationships help the lobbying firms get in the door. It's that those relationships help the lobbying firms be persuasive once they're in the room. So the article goes on. Unfortunately, it ends with a pretty bad overall suggestion. The suggestion or the solution that they propose here in Vox in this article is that the American people should spend more on Congress. Well, we're already taxed at a pretty heavy level, so I think it's pretty silly to say that we need to outspend corporations. We'll never be able to do that. Corporations will always be able to outspend the American people, and they'll always be able to outmaneuver us and outpersuade us. So my personal recommendation, my personal thought is to get this corporate cash out of the political system. These guys need term limits. These guys, they literally go to Capitol Hill, and they stay there practically for their entire lives. Their only incentive is re-election. That's it. And if they don't get re-elected, then guess what they get to do? They get to go work at one of these lobbying firms with a cush job, and they get to go right back into Capitol Hill pushing some corporate agenda that doesn't serve the American people. So no, I disagree with the conclusion of this article that the American people simply need to give more money to Congress. I think it's absurd. They have enough money. They need to instead divest themselves from all of this. And the revolving door that exists between Washington and corporate America is just unbelievably sick. I mean, we even saw this recently with Ben Bernanke leaving the Federal Reserve, and now he's going to be a top advisor at one of the top hedge funds. I mean, you got to be kidding me. I mean, that's ridiculous. Now all of the information that former professor and then now former Fed chairman, all the information that he had access to, all that information that he knew about the global economy and all the information that he knew about other central banks, now the hedge fund basically gets to hire that brain because they have enough money. That's an unfair advantage. That does not make any sense. And we should not allow our elected officials and even those who work for unelected positions like the Fed to be able to go out and take that information and give it to for-profit corporations who can then turn around and use it against not just other corporations, but against the American people. It all reminds me of Ben Franklin whenever he was asked what form of government America's founders had given to the nation, and he said, a republic, if you can keep it. And that really is the challenge today. And it certainly seems that Washington has gotten far too cozy with corporations. It's really turned into, friends, I mean, we have data, hard data, that the corporations are outspending you and I, the tax money that we paid to the Congress. And literally, you have to ask yourself, who is Congress working for now? You could say the American people until you're blue in the face, but look who signs the checks. Corporations pay more to Congress every single year. They spend more on Congress. They provide more benefits, more fringe benefits than the American people. And so who naturally are the politicians going to serve? You got to serve somebody, don't you? I mean, so it's an absolute disaster. It's an absolute disaster. And of course, the millionaires and billionaires are going to tell you that it's really good that money is in politics because that allows them to, make the rules of the game. They allows them to buy the system. And unless you're a millionaire or a billionaire who actually enjoys that system, then I have no clue why you would be for that. Unless you've been brainwashed by some sort of political party that says that's exactly what you should be for and that's what freedom is. And my friends, that's not freedom. Freedom is not being able to buy your way to whatever you want from Washington. That's not freedom. This is a jacked up system that we have. There's no doubt about it. So we'll have a link to that article on the show notes today. Really interesting article. There's more to it. You want to probably read through it.